Good evening. Welcome to the world tonight. It's January 8th, 2021. I'm Peter. We're joined with my fellow co-host Adam. And our first agenda today on the list is the events this week in the U.S., which have felt like 20 years occurring in the U.S. In the past week. Obviously, there was the Georgia runoffs that now people seem to have forgotten actually ever happened. And the riot at the Capitol building that put members of Congress at risk when doing the certification. So we'll start off first with the Senate Georgia runoff. On Tuesday, Democrats for the first time since 2000 won a Senate race in the state of Georgia. They won the special for the Senate seat vacated by Senator Johnny Isakson. Senator Kelly Loeffler was running. She lost to Raphael Warnock. And in the regular election that had to go to a runoff, that Senator David Perdue missed the 50 requirement. Jon Ossoff beat Senator Perdue, which Democrats now, because of these two wins, will take control of the Senate come January 20th when Vice President-elect Harris is sworn in. This also, of course, means that Democrats will have some powers now on the floor and now makes President Joe Biden's life a little more easier in terms of getting certain things through. Adam, first reactions on the Georgia Senate race.
So yeah, as you put out, this is going to ease the minds of Democrats and specifically Joe Biden, because it will make their job in trying to pass any early legislation for the first 2 years of a Biden presidency so much easier. And this is so important when you're looking at COVID relief, when you're looking at general economic packages to try and really get America kick-started, and then you're also looking towards their more sort of electoral reform and voting reform that Democrats have been wanting to push through Congress for a while now. So yeah, definitely important there. And then also you just have to think about the idea, an idea that existed for quite a long time. With Georgia specifically for the Democratic Party, was that they would always recruit bad candidates. It seemed like it would be a place where bad candidates were found. And still that sort of perception was taken to Warnock a few months ago, and same with Ossoff, because neither of them have won elected office prior to this. And even, Ossoff being at the age of, 33, I believe?
34.
34, sorry. It doesn't really seem to be the thing for striking leadership, but they've still been able to overcome those perceptions and really push through what, to be in my opinion, was quite a surprising win. I thought it was going to both runoffs would have gone to Republicans, but I was surprised. Yeah.
Yeah, and I will point, to our other fellow, Elections Daily member who was on the staff, Kratz Kravets, who wrote about this back in the summertime. The Georgia Democrats should stop being afraid about runoffs if they had a chance. And a lot of what he wrote came true. Republicans, did better with college-educated whites and other parts, but Democrats brought out more African-American vote. And also, the blunt reality is Republicans, because they ran on a message of stop the steal, didn't bring out a lot of the base they were hoping to bring out. And, the map, when you look at the Georgia map, a lot of these rural counties, Republicans didn't get the numbers they were hoping for. And with a narrow margin at play that both races were, one has to argue whether people like Lynn Wood and Sidney Powell pretty much cost Republicans 2 Senate seats in their Senate majority.
Yeah, another interesting element to look at is the actual ability to generate votes. So, for example, with Hispanics, both candidates were able to increase their margin with Hispanics by a massive amount. Primarily, it seems, because they were engaging with those voters, whereas it seems that the actual general campaign, that seemed to be an afterthought. So it really just shows to any sort of strategists out there that's maybe the key thing, that Democrats cannot just rely upon them turning up, and instead they have to actively reach out and try and win their votes.
Yeah, and I think for the Georgia Republicans, they've been at war with each other. The Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, and the Governor, Brian Kemp, have come under a lot of criticism from Republicans for numerous things, whether in their opinion, the handling of the election and post-election. Obviously, been very a mess. And now for Republicans, there is the blame game going around. Certain people blame Mitch McConnell. Others blame, as I mentioned, Lynn Wood and Sidney Powell. But as mentioned, Democrats now will have control. And one of the first things that came of this news was that President-elect Biden will be nominating Judge Merrick Garland. Yes, it's correct, folks. Merrick Garland is back. Just this time as the Attorney General. He's nominated him, which the expectation is that Garland will be confirmed very easily because of his credentials, which now allows Biden to possibly put one of his Supreme Court candidates, Judge Jackson of the D.C. Court, to the district court, to the D.C. Circuit Court, which would allow her possibly to replace her mentor Stephen Breyer down the road, possibly next year.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I would say fantastic. Look over there. And is that all you want to say on the?
Yeah, I think so. I think now we'll move to the other thing, the story that's been in the news for, the last 48 hours, and that is the, attack on the Capitol by armed thugs. Some would say terrorists. I'm more of the view they are terrorists, who ransacked the Capitol while the Electoral College certification was occurring in both chambers. As these goons broke in into the Capitol building, which itself is an alarm bell of concern. How Capitol Police weren't able to stop them, and now we've heard from the Associated Press that Capitol Police turned down requests for backup from both the Pentagon and the FBI, which is now it raises an eyebrow why they turned it down. And we had these thugs come very close to breaking into chambers with members of Congress, and having, of course, the president, the vice president, who was already under a lot of hot water with Donald Trump over the certification, and the Speaker of the House both in danger of being attacked by goons. And people were, these senators had to be, and representatives had to be evacuated to their offices and then a secure bunker, which is just scary to think about.
I think the important thing when looking at this, and I've seen a lot of this commentary around the Capitol building riots, is that the take is that this is a uniquely US thing, or at least this type of cult of personality really exploding over and actively turning into political violence. But I think this is a really naive view, and it's primarily coming from Western Europe. And as a show where we talk about the world, it's very important to look at that this isn't a uniquely American thing. We have to think about the fact that more than 4 years ago, Jo Cox, a Labour Party MP in the UK, was assassinated by a far right terrorist. Same goes to Walter Lübcke in Germany, a local politician there. He was assassinated by a neo-Nazi as well. Plots against politicians is not a unique thing in Western Europe. And it's being seen from the far right as well as Islamist terrorists and a variety of different groups. But it seems to be a uniquely fascist thing for those who have actively succeeded in those goals. And as I said, I don't think it's something where we should say this is something that can't affect us or there's something that won't affect us, because it's built into our to a lot of our country's narratives. For example, in the media environments of countries like Italy or France, you have very large outlets, primarily online, that promote an alternate view, a far-right one, and that peddles a lot of misinformation and fake news and conspiracy theories, like the Great Replacement and other such. That means that they're able to promote themselves further, and ultimately, they would actively engage in the type of violence, misinformation that we've seen Trump supporters who engaged in these riots, actively participate in. It's very concerning that a lot of the actual conversations around what happened in the US isn't internal reflection going, what has happened here? How can we ensure that doesn't happen to us? It's more, we're above the United States, which I don't think is the case at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think, having seen a lot of commentary from people, basically, chastising the U.S. for this, and it's fair. Look, the U.S., is an experiment that has lasted so many centuries, on this, I think too many people don't realize that, democracy in any country is very fragile. Regardless of how strong your institutions may be, democracy can crack, and we've seen that throughout, the history of the world. That plenty of countries that were democracies at one point broke up, and it's not, just a uniquely American thing or anything. And I think, to your point, yes, it's also an issue in other parts of the world. And I think the other candid reality is you had certain individuals who went around saying, they could, change the results of this, election on that certification day, which they couldn't. There were no votes for that. In riding it up, and as someone who's an American, it's very disgusting to see that, an event, such as that, which is sacred, was, ransacked.
Yeah, I'd say just one final thing, which is the main one, is trust in elections. And specifically when I talk about, I'm referring more to this idea of election fraud. And
yes.
The conspiracies around it aren't a unique thing. It existed. Obviously, Donald Trump himself engaged in it even when he won in 2016. But in, for example, the Austrian presidential elections in 2018, Swedish parliamentary elections, far-right figures propped up this idea that there was electoral fraud. And even looking to my own country, the United Kingdom, in the Peterborough by-election, which I believe was that 2019, I believe.
Yes.
There was Nigel Farage posted allegations of electoral fraud by postal ballots. And that has really been a main striking point by these figures who want to try and sow, I guess, distrust in election validity, is going after postal votes and that kind of thing. And it will only really be expanded by the way that Trump engaged in it. So I definitely think it's something we need to be vigilant about. And definitely try and engage and stay away from those discourses about trying to actively undermine elections without any confirmed evidence to what they're trying to push.
Yeah, and I think on the point of the U.S., look, I mean, one can say whatever, opinion about the election was, but the election was over on the 14th when the Supreme Court ruled in 2 cases. It was done. There was nothing to investigate, and the president should have, in the grace of the office, conceded in that way and moved on. But obviously Donald Trump is not that type of person to concede. And of course we're now here, and Joe Biden, it should be known, I'm no fan of his, has a long road ahead to try to convince the country to unite. And if he succeeds in that, he will obviously do a significant of a job. If he doesn't, then the deterioration in the U.S. of political stability will just continue to get worse.
But you could argue that America has become such a polarized country, and even looking at the polling results for, obviously it's polling, but for who people blame for these riots, or what people would call these rioters, I think it was about 15% in I believe it was a YouGov poll, said they were patriots. And you have to think when, obviously it's a poll, so all of the caveats that come with that, but a fair substantial amount of your country believes that these people who, I would argue with yourself that, they are domestic terrorists, are patriots. That is something that is incredibly hard to try and recover from.
Well, yes.
So it actively goes to this case where if you have someone who doesn't engage and loses consent, where the whole point of a democracy is that both sides, if when it comes down to the results at the end of the day, acknowledge who won and who lost. If you lose that in such a polarized country, then it's almost irreversible, because they already believe Joe Biden stole it. So I don't believe he'll ever really be able to convince them that he is truly legitimate.
Yes, I do, and that is a fair point. I just think, again, I know a lot of people have been writing America's obituary in these last few days, saying it's over, the experiment is done, and it could be the case. But I will say, America, if its history is to be repeated, has had many moments of darkness, and we've survived. It's just, again, having to find, appropriate middle ground. And I think, there is a criticism to be made here at the media for fueling the flames for the last few decades of pushing people to polar extremes and pushing a lot of individuals to do things that are just reprehensible.
Yeah. No, I agree. But just as a final note on this general topic, we have to sort of, I guess, come to the conclusion of is there we always talk about sorry, not GB News, Donald Trump News, the Donald Trump News Network that's going to come after, and likely will. Do you still think that, given the events and almost the incitement of these supporters and trying to get them riled up to the extent where they do go to these extreme actions, do you think that these sort of things will push him far too out of the mainstream where he won't be able to engage in an active media base? Or do you think that he has such a significant level of support that will just never die away, that he will still have a significant hold over the United States after he's left office?
I think that depends. I think there's 2 points on that topic. I think first, someone made a good post about this. Patrick Rafani made a good point. That a lot of the reason why Trump is what it is the media, when he ran in 2015/16, gave him a lot of free airtime. His rallies were covered. He was being interviewed on everything. So I think that's the first thing. How does the media deal with a post-President Trump? Do they still cover him 24/7? Do they sort of remove him from the spotlight? Do they just occasionally mention him? I think that's one issue to look for. And I think the second thing is what happens with social media. I mean, Twitter and other social media outlets have been going after him very hard in the last few days. And some have argued that come the 20th, Twitter may permanently ban him and other social media sites. So I think it probably depends on what his reach is with that. Do I think he could win the Republican primary in 2024? Sadly, yes. But again, that probably depends, of course, how the next 4 years go. I'm of the view that this week's events have helped a certain governor in Florida, Ron DeSantis' 2024 profile, but it remains to be seen if, he does run in 4 years' time, or whether he just, doesn't and sits on the sidelines and others, run for that. Like Senator Hawley, who has gotten into a lot of hot water for, doing this, the challenging of states, with some arguing that he's only doing this for 2024 purposes.
Yeah, and that's definitely an interesting perspective, and really to see if the long-term legacy of an event like this does go to the extent where people look back and go, this was wrong, or if it continues to be a situation where they look back and go, this is a highly polarizing event, which it really shouldn't be, because it is, as you say, domestic terrorism. But there we are.
And 535 members of the United States government were put in danger because of a security thing. And I mean, it's sad to say that the grounds around the Capitol are sadly going to probably have to be fenced up for the remainder of human time because of one horrific event.
One final thing I want to ask you about before I think we can move on is Donald Trump has said he's not going to attend the inauguration of Joe Biden. What are your takes on that?
Well, I think it's ridiculous. You should attend. I think it's tradition. It sets a bad precedent. I think you lose. You should attend with grace. I think whatever your criticisms are of Mike Pence, and people, a lot of them, Pence has, done the noble thing and correct thing by attending the inauguration and signifying the peaceful transition of power, and at least in one aspect of it. So I think it's a very incorrect decision on his part. He should attend. I mean, one of the images of inaugurations have always been the outgoing and incoming presidents, walking beside each other up that ramp to the, inauguration ground.
Okay, fantastic. So I say fantastic. I mean, in terms of fantastic. Thank you for your contribution. Anyway,
it is an opinion show. It's fine. Anyway.
So I can lead on this next one.
Yes.
Finally, and I say finally because it's gone on for about 5 years now. Or it feels like 5 years. Brexit has come to an end. The transition period has finally ended. So, Peter, do you want to go over what's changed? What are the implications?
So I know many of you are going to ask, why are we covering this on January 8th? We would have covered this if we had a show on Christmas Day, but of course, we enjoy our holidays enough. So this is the deal the UK and the EU struck on Christmas Eve of 2020. This was the deal that had been rumored that was going to happen, not going to happen, and they struck a deal. This deal now puts the UK and the EU in a free trade zone, with numerous new rules put in place. The UK itself will be subject to EU regulations, inevitably into regulatory alignment, even if the UK government tries to deny this. It also will not have to do customs checks, as would EU products, and also the fisheries thing I believe, and you may correct me if I'm wrong. The new quote is the EU can have 25% of fish in British waters, and that for 5 years until that has to be worked around. I mean, they struck a deal. They left on a deal, so I mean, it helped both economies because both are interdependent on each other, and it now means that the very dangerous thing about no deal Brexit is no longer something we have to worry about. And in that regard, the controversial internal market bill that was passed, those provisions are also gone now. So the Republic and the Northern Ireland will be very much a seamless border.
Yes, as you said, this is an incredibly important thing for their economies and ensuring that things will stay relatively similar. But there are some very important changes.
Yeah.
For example, services and British access to your EU markets will face greater restrictions and lose the advantages that they currently face by, for example, automatic right to access said markets. And then it goes further to some sort of more minor things like the automatic recognition of professional qualifications will also go. The UK will also, a good thing for many Brexiteers is that they've left the European Court of Justice, but will still be subject to an independent tribunal if there are any issues that come up between the EU and UK. And then also in terms of some other very consequential things is that the UK has lost out on participation in Erasmus Plus. And for a lot of people, this may not seem to be the most significant thing, but for me and myself as a student, but for also those who want to work in the EU or engage in apprenticeships in the EU, or the thousands of projects that are funded by Erasmus money that's going is being replaced instead by a primarily university-oriented scheme called the Turing Scheme, which will try and promote student access to universities across the world rather than specifically the EU. But yeah, so there are quite a few changes as we've highlighted. I strongly recommend, if anybody's interested, just to go through and read it themselves, come to their own conclusions on whether they think this is a good deal or a bad deal. I have my own opinions, but in reality,
what are your opinions on that deal, if I may ask?
I think that if we're looking at the perspective of if it's a good deal or a bad deal, and just if there was a deal or not, I think it's a bad deal. But from the other side of it, I'm glad no deal Brexit isn't happening, because that would be far worse than anything this deal presents. I still think the UK's economy will be at risk because of how how heavily service aligned it is. And the ease of access to European markets will pose a significant issue there. But in terms of goods, I'm glad that they'll face no tariffs and no quotas.
I mean, my opinion on the deal, obviously, as an outsider, is it's a decent deal. I think my view is it's the best deal the UK government could get with its demands it was asking, but the EU was willing to give up. Now there's an argument to be made that some that the membership was better. The EFTA was better. I mean, that will be in everyone's conclusions. But I mean, it was the best deal Britain could get on the principles of leaving on the 31st with what it wanted. And the UK will have its own world, and the remaining 27 will deal on their own end. And I think this long awkward relationship will move on. And I think in terms of other programs, it remains to be seen. Of course, conceivably in the future, a Labour government could renegotiate this deal and push for further integration into Europe if they'd like to, but it remains to be seen. Of course, the issue for now is dumbled down, but it could very much, in a renegotiation period, come back to light. But I think it's the best deal in terms of what the UK government was requesting.
Yeah, I'd say on the case of Labour's position at the moment, they've said that they won't touch it at all. They're not going into the next general election. They won't be talking about it at all. They'll just be leaving it. And to be honest, I can't imagine them doing that really, because what we're looking at here is a situation in which Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, doesn't want to upset any potential Brexit voting former Labour voters who went Tory in 2019.
But they need to win back.
And they're hoping to bring them back by simply saying, here we go. I hope that we won't touch this. We're going to focus on the economy and the NHS instead, and we'll leave this. Who knows how it will be in future general elections? I imagine afterwards if the economy is still sort of being damaged by, maybe service access or I don't know, greater restrictions or the desire to align more with Europe. All of that will come up later on, but I don't really see it being a major thing in 2024.
Yeah, I agree. I think neither. So I don't think Brexit is going to be something Labour wants to talk about, especially considering the fact that their best issue polling-wise is health, and that may be very well their better benefit for them to talk about, but we shall wait and see. Moving on to our next issue here is the Saudi-Qatar deal that was struck over the last week by Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, who has become very much known in the Middle East as the signer of deals involving Arab countries. I'll let Adam explain what has happened in this agreement and why this agreement had to be reached.
So I'll take first looking at the context here. So in 2017, a dispute arose between Saudi Arabia and Qatar that resulted in diplomatic relations being severed and banned Qatar registered planes and ships utilizing Saudi, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain and Egyptian airspace and sea routes, while also blocking Qatar's only land crossing, that being with Saudi Arabia. So why did this dispute come about? Well, the Saudi-led coalition cited Qatar's accused Qatar of backing Iran's ambitions in the region, as well as supporting Islamist groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, which many monarchs in the Middle East see as being their greatest threat beyond Iran. It's sort of this idea of political Islam that could incite mass revolt against the monarchy and the poor conditions that could be, or the actual realization of the poor conditions that people are in if they take up more political engagement. So for them, that is a major threat. And the accusation follows there that that Qatar was supporting them. So Turkey's warming to Qatar as well was seen as being, Qatar giving too much power to someone else that wasn't Gulf states. And so that too was seen as a reason for what would be an embargo that formed. And there were a set of demands levied against Qatar that if they met, they would eventually be able to have the embargo ended, such as the closing of Al Jazeera, the media, a sort of empire, I guess, that is operated by their government, closing the Turkish military base in Qatar, cutting diplomatic relations with Iran, except for trade and commerce that complied with international sanctions, and some other key things. However, as Peter has set up now, that the news now is that diplomatic relations have been restored between Qatar and Arab states. Land, air, and sea borders are being reopened. But I think the interesting thing to here is to really look at what did Saudi Arabia win out of this quite significantly long, at least for this kind of major embargo, diplomatic crisis. And to be honest, it didn't actually get that much in the end. Qatar is closer now to Turkey than ever before. Their role as an independent mediator in the region has actually been emphasized now that the Gulf states have pushed away from them. And Al Jazeera, as some of you may know, is certainly still around. So yeah, they didn't really get anything out of it. And now with this deal, they still haven't. Peter, do you have any thoughts on the deal itself? And
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, the deal itself isn't, again, terrible, in terms of getting regional stress done. I mean, it was negotiated by, Mohammed bin Salman and Qatar Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad, Jared Kushner. But I mean, look, I agree with most of your points. I mean, still at the end, it doesn't really change anything much. I mean, sure, Qatar and Saudi Arabia are now, on normalized relationships, but Qatar remains, more aligned with Turkey. It still has its open relationship with Iran. That hasn't changed. Saudis, displeasure at the Qataris doesn't change. The only benefit, if anything, is it just makes the U.S.'s life a little bit in the region a little easier, in terms of dealing with regional cooperation, since we'll have the Qataris and the Saudis at least on more traditional grounds of, not blockading that. And look, I'm of the view Al Jazeera is a very, is a network that doesn't have very good things attached to it due to its connections with Islamist terrorist groups and Qatar's connections with those groups. But in terms of it, look, Jared Kushner negotiated a soft diplomatic deal, and credit be given to him. I mean, whatever you think of the outgoing administration's foreign policy, Jared Kushner was very good at striking these small deals that have, small impacts or big impacts. I mean, it's okay deal for in terms of Saudi-Equatorial relations and the American interests, but I don't really see any grandness in this. I just think it's a normalized peace, Middle Eastern peace, helicopter diplomacy.
Yeah, and as I said, I'd argue it's a bad thing for Saudi Arabia because they went
Yeah.
through this three-year stage of posturing about how Qatar should engage with their demands, and ultimately they haven't met any of them.
Saudi Arabia's demands, if anything, none, at the end of the day, actually came to fruition.
Exactly. And so going on from that is something very, very different. And we're going back once again to Hong Kong, where the continual authoritarian cloud that has been forming over it is continually growing and enveloping the city. So with this specifically, the Hong Kong government has arrested 53 pro-democracy activists, politicians, and organizers on counts of subversion under the national security law that was imposed on Hong Kong last year. These 53 arrests targeted those who organized and stood in the pro-democracy primaries that were to select the candidates for the Hong Kong legislative elections. This list included some pretty serious political figures, such as Claudia Mo, a member of the Legislative Council for 8 years, but also newcomers to the political scene, such as Lee Chi-young, who is a disability human rights activist. So as you can tell from that sort of brief description of the two types, these aren't really your typical ideas of quote-unquote subversive figures. But to the Chinese Communist Party, anybody who even espouses democratic ideals are. The main reason behind these arrests from Hong Kong authorities' perspective was that anyone who wanted to hold a majority in the Legislative Council via this pro-democracy activism could stop the executive's power as a means of extracting democratic reform concessions. So, for example, the budget could have been stopped because the legislature, which to the Hong Kong government could have possibly have gained a pro-democracy's majority. They could have used that to try and enact, any kind of democratic reform that you could think of. But as you can see, this really just proves their point that democratic reform is needed, in which every single candidate who stood in the pro-democracy protest, who either hadn't been arrested already or hadn't fled Hong Kong, was arrested. And that I just can't stress enough how serious that is for the implications. You have serious, brain power and activist knowledge that is in this collective group of people that has just been completely seized from the Hong Kong people, and any kind of infrastructure that they have has been cut off as well, because the Chinese government and the Hong Kong government have frozen assets of not only this group, but also an organization that does polling for the pro-democracy aligned group, but it is more independent. They themselves have seen their offices raided and all their assets seized. So yeah, this is very serious. Just to add on, finally, all but one of these candidates has been released on bail, but as a condition of this, they have to give up their passports. So in reality, there's no real way of them fleeing what ultimately is going to be a very serious fate, a very concerning one, in which their safety is in no way guaranteed. And the fact that they'll remain on Hong Kong is not guaranteed at all. There is the strong possibility that they could face incredibly harsh conditions on the mainland in China.
Yeah, I mean, what's happening in China, especially with Hong Kong, the continuation of a degradation of individual liberty and freedom is a very sad, as I mentioned here, reality of what Hong Kong is slowly, drifted to since the handover from Britain. It's gone from a staple kind of arguably, neoliberalism to the horror of totalitarianism. These protesters who many of whom had stuck around thinking they could hold on, have been bashed. I mean, the elections last year that looked like there were a repudiation of the mainland. Also, a lot of those people elected have been slowly but surely removed or squeezed out of power. And it's just a very sad occasion what's happening in Hong Kong. Especially on these arrests, it's the Chinese government, continuing its grip on Hong Kong that continues to get tighter and tighter to the point where now it's free to say that Hong Kong is now an official member of the People's Republic of China, and there is no, one country, two systems approach. That is long dead.
Yeah, I entirely agree. And we're at the situation now where there is no going back. Or at least I believe that. As I said, the actual intellectual brain power behind these movements is gone. These are great orators who are able to inspire millions of people to come out to the streets. They're gone. And the actual, very draconian restrictions that have been applied upon Hong Kong because of the coronavirus is also doubled as a means of ensuring that nobody can protest. And during this very critical phase where people need to express their voice, they're being stopped by threat of very harsh punishment. And the final thing I'd like to say is that the reason they're arrested, they say, is subversion. And as I've already gone over, this idea that subversion is just getting elected and winning a majority is just, it's incredible to think that, I guess, looking back at it now, it makes people feel quite, not naive in the sense that they ever believed that the actual Chinese government ever would have let Hong Kong get a pro-democracy majority. It looks very performative for the the local elections by letting them win a majority there, having that that ability of hope. And then in mere months, China, the Chinese government has swooped in and changed the landscape of Hong Kong entirely.
Yeah, I mean, China's deception to the West that it actually valued Hong Kong's political independence has been one of the greatest coups in terms of, jetting perceptions, altered from reality, and they've now pretty much said, yeah, no, we're going to take control of Hong Kong. It's now Chinese territory, and it's fully integrated the same way Macau, when it was handed over from Portugal, was expected to still have some individual differences. That's not even a thing anymore. It's just, a part of the mainland straightforwardly.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think that we're almost getting to the situation now of going, how worse can it get? Because it already is very bad. What could the Chinese Communist Party possibly impose next? And really, what is the role that the international community takes with trying to take a stand with Hong Kong? Because despite the very many statements that have been released and the
condemnations,
and also the actual incentives to be able to speed up immigration for these people fleeing from Hong Kong, it doesn't really seem to be taking effect quick enough, at least in the UK, where I don't even think it's set up properly yet.
Yeah, no, it hasn't.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, it's fine.
I was going to say, I don't think, so as I said, I don't think it's even been set up yet. And it's far too late at this stage, or at least in my opinion, because any of the actual key people, these activists who, may not have even been mainstream, who were just people who had, wanted to stand in the pro-democracy protest, in the primaries, because they really want to see their city change, are being, condemned to a fate where they have no idea what's going to happen. So I feel like a lot of what has been done by the West and the wider world simply hasn't been enough. And we're at the stage now where it's almost impossible to go back and make any changes that would really relieve the situation.
Yeah, I mean, just to add a final point, I mean, we've seen governments condemn this, but then last week we saw the EU sign an investment agreement with the People's Republic of China. When condemning them for months about how they're this and that, and they signed an agreement. So it's just, at times pure hypocrisy we're seeing, or pure just disengagement from Western governments about, the Chinese thing, and then signing agreements, which is really disingenuous to a lot of the cause that a lot of these people in Hong Kong have had to go through. Because at the end of the day, certain countries are still taking in that Chinese commerce because it's, profitable.
Exactly, and that is definitely the key takeaway, is that it was just a lot of words and no action.
Yeah.
But I think on that final note, we will move on to, I believe, what is our last topic for today, which we go to Ghana. Africa isn't an area we really touch much, but I think with this new year, it's an area we need to try and look at least once a week.
Yes.
So, as discussed a few weeks back, the new parliament in Ghana essentially split down the middle, with a tiny majority for the New Patriotic Party, which is a centre-right aligned party in one of the few stable democracies in Western Africa. So it ended up being 137 for the New Patriotic Party and 137 for the opposition National Democratic Congress. When we last discussed this, the government was set to hold the support of that one independent who also ran and ended up winning, who was a former MPP candidate. But there's something quite interesting that's happened, but I'll get to that in a sec. Anyway, so beyond the implications of this incredibly divided legislature, which will make passing relief legislation in response to the devastation of COVID-19 on the global economy, has also created very physical tensions that have been flaring. So I'm referring to fights that erupted after a governing party MP from the New Patriotic Party tried to seize the ballot box during the vote for the parliamentary speaker. So this was a fight that lasted hours and was broken up by military intervention. And was televised. The entire thing for those hours was shown on for everyone to see in the country. But the fascinating bit at the edge of this was an opposition MP was the one who won that speaker vote. So despite the fact that there was this independent candidate, I believe he ended up voting for the opposition. Despite previous words that he said he was going to support the ruling party. So it ended up being a vote of 138 to 136, with one MP failing to vote. So this is the first time in Ghana's history that the Speaker of the Parliament was not selected from the governing party. So what we've seen come out of this very tight election campaign in Ghana and the results is definitely set to be a fascinating split between the New Patriotic Party's president, who won by a very narrow margin, and then the legislature, which is being probably not the most controlled by this new opposition Speaker of the Parliament, and it will be a very tenuous relationship. But to be fair, it will be interesting beyond this, obviously, sad implication for democracy where MPs are engaging in active fights with one another because they're not getting their way. There is also the hope that with this divided, with an executive and legislature that is divided, there was just the simple hope, again, with a very divided legislature, that it means that more of the country or these representatives will have to come together and engage and seek out compromises that suit both camps for the best. But as we know with some countries, this can be a very difficult situation and probably even leads to even more polarization. But will definitely be an interesting case to watch because, Ghana's position as a stable democracy has sort of been threatened recently with this with allegations of fraud having taken place in the election, but it wasn't too widespread. So there is the hope from international representatives who came to observe the election. They noted there were some minor things, but as a whole, it was conducted fairly. So there is obviously the hope in the future that this will continue and Ghana will sustain itself as a very stable democracy.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with what you said. I think also the fact is Ghana has been very much a beacon of some light in West Africa, which is notorious for failed democratic experiments. And look, this independent has shown he has a bit of a streaky manner in terms of how he will use his conscience. So it's at least impressive to see that. And the legislature in typical session, had some fun fisticuffs, which is intriguing to see. But no, I mean, it'll be interesting to see. There are the allegations of fraud that have happened with the legislative and presidential election, but for the most part, they don't seem widespread, and just seems like one person just a little angry at what little result. Again, Ghana hopefully continues its good progress. With this legislature being right down the middle, the 50-50, almost like the Senate in the U.S. Will be on the 20th. It's interesting to see, of course, what will be done in negotiations and what the government will do with the opposition in terms of negotiating packages. But for the most part, I think I think that Ghana's been through a lot in its past to understand what the seriousness, if anything, with the present.
Yep, and I think just talking about the general thing of looking at Africa specifically with the world tonight, it's going to be good to try and specifically hone in on an area of the world that never gets really touched upon that much.
Yeah.
And specifically with this parliamentary clash, it's something that got barely any coverage, despite how important it was to really, I guess, as a case study to see how divided government works elsewhere in the world, because we hear about it a lot with the United States, but let's see how it plays out in West Africa.
Indeed, and seeing as if we've gotten there, before we go to the loser of the week, we would ask you always to follow us on Elections Daily's Twitter account. You can find articles submitted new articles by staff or previous ones, and you can find previous episodes of this show on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever streaming services you use, because of Audible, which is a great thing that carries all of these things in whatever service you use. But anyway, just as a quick thing, also next week's show, we for certain will be covering the CDU leadership election, which is imminently happening that same weekend, which will be very interesting to see about the future of the CDU and possibly the next chancellor of Germany.
And also, I'd like to quickly add, we also have Kazakhstan's legislative election, which I know everyone's just rearing for. I certainly am. So also make sure to come and listen for that. But also it'll be on the 10th of January. Follow AsiaLex at AsiaLex on Twitter,
site,
because we'll be covering that election as well.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, I think we should go straight into the loser of the week now. Everyone's favorite time. Peter, who is your loser of the week?
Well, there are a lot of nominations, for this week. Very hard to, bring them down. So I'm just going to go down, and I'm going to have to be this person and say the loser of the week for me, and it's not humorous this week. It's the DC Police. I mean, not DC, the Capitol Police. For not preparing properly and rejecting military help and FBI help to guard the Capitol because they felt they were in control of things. I mean, come on. I mean, if you knew there were going to be a lot of protesters there, you probably should have asked for some backup. And of course, they didn't. And we had the horrible tragedy that was, 4 people dying in this, attack. And we had senators and representatives who had to, almost think that they were in danger of dying. And, I mean, we've heard now from the FBI that certain members of these goons wanted to take the vice president, the speaker, and the 2 Senate leaders a hostage, which is just a horrifying thought to think about. So DC Capitol Police are my loser of the week. They've already, their head has already basically been fired by the speaker who runs the DC, who is the final arbiter of DC Capitol Police. And, very much so that they've already had to put a fence up, which is probably another sad indication of how bad they, have failed. So they are my loser of the week.
Okay, so my one, it didn't technically happen this week, but it came over the span of when we didn't have a proper show. So I'm going to do it anyway. And I wanted to do a bit more of a light-hearted rant at the end. And it was the BBC, or I don't know if it was officially done by the BBC, but anyway, the actual New Year's Eve celebration thingy that was aired on TV. I don't know what you'd call it, but basically it was initially a very lovely light show, fireworks as well, but then it came to what I believe was drones, or was done by drones, or it was some kind of way of projecting light into the air, where it looks back at 2020 and some of our favorite moments. And my God, was it the cringiest thing I've ever seen. I think that I cannot describe it very well because, again, it was a very visual thing. But I would just recommend everybody to Google, I guess, BBC 2020 New Year's show. I think that would be the easiest way to find it. And yeah, just watch it because it covered everyone's favorite moments, such as being put on mute on a video call. And I'm sure it was very wholesome to some people, but it just felt like a very loser thing. If you're looking at what the word loser means, it just felt I felt like a loser watching it. But yeah, anyway, that's my loser of the week. That display, which I think is a bit more lighthearted to try and
Yes.
get
I mean,
that.
I will say the New Year's coverage with Corona this year was really not very optimistic, mind you. I don't really like New Year's Eve coverage for starters, because it's usually kind of, especially in the U.S., way too New York centric.
There was, well, speaking of that, there was somebody, I can't remember the name of the singer, apparently someone famous that I don't know. She was singing the song, or New York, I don't know if that's what the name of the song is, or you know the song where she sings New York multiple times. She was singing that in London, and it just felt, how could you make this any more New York centric in the UK for the BBC's coverage? It was,
I mean, it would be something if maybe she removed New York and maybe put London in the song just for a London special song. I didn't think Brits want to have to hear about, an American city, across the channel.
Oh yeah, no, that entire performance, the show, I was really tired. Even though I was excited about 2021, how naive I was at being excited for this year. It wasn't great. I mean, I think just like before we like round off the show, because I know that a date is an arbitrary line. Changing to a new year is arbitrary. It's not going to change anything in reality. But there was this genuine sense of hope, and I don't think I was the only one who held it. That things were going to get better, and then just a few days later, it seemed like
better.
Yeah, exactly. And then it felt like Washington D.C. was basically on fire. So there we are.
Yes, fun world we live in. Anyway, before we wrap up the show, I'll ask you, Adam, as a follower of European politics, what is your prediction for the CDU contest? Since that's obviously may not be on the thing. Do you have a view of who may win it?
Oh, right. Okay. I will be honest and say that I haven't been paying most attention to this specifically. However, my very I think it'll be easy to ask what you think, and then while I quickly try and remember, I have it written down somewhere in preparation.
Yeah, no, just because we have time, I will ask it, and then in 2 weeks' time we can see who was wrong. My prediction is, and if I get this wrong, someone can please throw crow at me. I think Friedrich Merz will be the next leader of the CDU.
Okay, fair enough. Just looking at my notes, I had, is it Laschet?
Yeah, Laschet.
Yeah, I don't. Again, I have no idea why I put that. I must have seen it in the Europe Elects group chat, which I'm a member of. I don't, to be honest. I know it may sound like a bit of a sin for a European politics follower. I don't really care about Germany too much. I genuinely don't.
He's the typical Brit.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. I care about countries where I can align myself politically. So, for example, I love French politics. I think that I could find a place to easily align myself. I love Estonian politics. That's fascinating as well. But with Germany, I would probably, to be honest, I'd probably end up voting CDU, but not feel like ideologically aligned because I cannot stand the FDP. So there's my reasoning behind it, why I don't actually pay that much attention. So take my prediction with mainly how I respond to most elections, and I just guess and hope I'm right.
No problem at all. Since I see we're out of time and we can end the show early today, I want to thank you all for watching. It's always a pleasure to have a lovely audience watch the show. And as noted, we cannot wait to see you next week when we talk about the CDU in Kazakhstan and probably a lot more.
Yeah. I definitely will read up more on the CDU election than I have right now.
Indeed. And from all of us here at The World Tonight, have a great rest of your day. Stay safe and have a good night.
Good night.